My brother stole my fiancée and the family fortune, so I used his own arrogance to systematically dismantle his life. There are things you know without knowing how you know them. A subtle shift in the air before a storm, the stillness in a room after an argument, the almost invisible crack in the foundation of a house that, given enough time and pressure, will bring the whole structure down. For most of my life, my job, my self-appointed role, was to ignore those cracks. I was the family silent engineer, the one who worked behind the scenes to patch the plaster and reinforce the beams, all to maintain the illusion that our home was perfect. Our family home wasn't just a house. It was a testament. A sprawling colonial on the best street in our suburban Ohio town, with a lawn so green, it looked like a special effect, and ancient oak trees that whispered stories of generations. It was the physical manifestation of the American dream my parents, Richard and Diane, had built, and the stage upon which their perfect family performed. My mother, Diane, was the director of this play. Her life's mission was to project an image of effortless harmony, a Christmas card in perpetual motion. Conflict, to her, was a vulgar failure of stage management, something to be swept under the rug before the neighbors could notice. I'm Leo, their second son. At 30 years old, I was the quiet engine in the family machine. While my older brother, Marcus, was the visionary, the golden child, I was the one who made his visions viable. We co-founded an architectural firm together right out of college. He would sketch breathtaking designs on napkins, structures that seemed to defy gravity and convention, and I would be the one to figure out the budgets, the permits, the brutally realistic logistics that turned his art into reality. He was the face of the company. I was the spine. It was a role that suited me. My dedication to being the family's invisible support system wasn't born from nothing. I was 8 years old, huddled at the top of the stairs, my pajamas feeling paper-thin against the cold of the polished wood floor. Downstairs, my parents were having a fight. Not their usual bickering, but a real, terrifying battle. My mother's voice was sharp with a fear I'd never heard before. My father's was a low rumble of frustration. It was about money, about risk. Then came the sound that would forever be etched in my memory, the sharp, explosive crash of a dinner plate shattering against the kitchen wall. In the ensuing silence, I made a vow to my 8-year-old self. I would never be the cause of sound like that. I would be the quiet one, the easy one, the fixer. I would absorb tension, not create it. I would become a master of patching cracks. Marcus, at 33, was everything I wasn't. Effortlessly charming, universally loved, and blessed with a creative genius that seemed to flow from him like water. He was a genuinely good man, which almost made his perfection tolerable. He deserved the title of Golden Child. He remembered birthdays, called our parents just to chat, and had a way of making everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room. And then there was Caleb, our younger brother. At 26, Caleb was a study in simmering resentment disguised as rebellious charm. He was handsome, quick-witted, and possessed a talent for making his own failures seem like the fault of an unjust world, a world that had, in his eyes, handed everything to Marcus on a silver platter. He drifted between sales jobs he despised, his complaints a constant, bitter soundtrack to our family gatherings. He was my father's blind spot. My dad, a man of few words, saw Caleb as the underdog and felt a misguided duty to protect him. A protection that Caleb expertly wielded as a shield against any and all accountability. Into this carefully balanced ecosystem walked Chloe. The first time Marcus brought her home, it felt like the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. She was an event planner, and her own life seemed to be a perfectly executed event. She was stunning, of course, with a smile that could disarm a firing squad, but it was more than that. She had an almost supernatural ability to read a room and become exactly what it needed. She discussed stock portfolios with my father, praised my mother's decorating taste with what seemed like genuine awe, and even managed to get me to open up about a difficult project at work. She looked at Marcus with an adoration that was like sunshine, and under her gaze, my already brilliant brother seemed to shine even brighter. But I'm the one who notices the cracks. And with Chloe, the cracks were subtle, almost microscopic. During a family dinner, I saw her watching my father as he spoke about his investment portfolio, her eyes holding a sharpness, a calculation that didn't match her soft, adoring smile. It was fleeting, but I saw it. Later, she found me in the study while I was reviewing some of the firm's quarterly reports. She brought me a glass of wine, leaning against the desk with an easy grace. "It must be so rewarding," she said, her voice a low murmur, "building something so successful. I'll never have to worry about where my next meal is coming from again, Leo." She laughed it off as a joke about her own difficult childhood, a story she'd told us about growing up with less. At the time, I filed it away as admirable determination. It was only in hindsight that I understood it for what it was, a personal mission statement. A vow. The real warning signs began to flash around Caleb. At first, it was small things. He started showing up at the house Marcus and Chloe shared, always with a plausible excuse. He needed to borrow a tool. He wanted Marcus's advice on a car. He started working out at their gym. Then, the excuses became flimsier. He'd be there when Marcus was out of town on business, supposedly to keep an eye on the place. The scene that should have made me act happened at the annual 4th of July barbecue. It was a perfect summer day, the air thick with the smell of cut grass and grilling meat. The entire extended family was there. I went to grab a beer from the cooler on the deck and saw them in a shadowed corner by the rose bushes. Caleb and Chloe. They weren't doing anything overt, just talking. But his body was angled toward hers, a possessive, intimate posture. As she laughed at something he said, she reached out and rested her hand on his forearm. It wasn't a fleeting, friendly touch. It lingered. And the way Caleb looked at her, it was a look of raw, unconcealed hunger. It was the look of a man who was claiming something. They saw me. They sprang apart, but not before I saw the shared, secret guilt in their eyes. Chloe recovered first, her brilliant smile snapping back into place. "Oh, Leo, I was just telling Caleb he should let me help him redecorate his dreadful apartment." Caleb just smirked, a look of smug challenge in his eyes. My heart hammered in my chest. I knew. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty. And I did what I had trained myself to do my entire life. I smiled back. I made a joke about Caleb's taste in posters. I patched the crack. I walked away, the ice in my beer melting against my hand, my silence a heavy, suffocating blanket. I told myself I was protecting Marcus from a truth that would destroy him. I told myself I was protecting my mother from the kind of explosion she feared most. But the truth is, I was just being a coward. I was choosing the illusion of peace over the brutal, necessary truth. And my silence was the soil in which the seeds of betrayal took root and began to grow. The months leading up to my parents' 35th wedding anniversary were a masterclass in denial, a season of willful blindness. The signs weren't just cracks anymore. They were tremors shaking the very foundation of our family. Caleb was a constant presence in Marcus and Chloe's life. He had his own key now, a fact Chloe explained away with breezy logic. He's so good with the dog, and it's silly for him to have to wait for us if we're running late. Marcus, blinded by love and his own innate goodness, saw it as a sign of family harmony. "Isn't it great how well they get along?" he'd say to me, his face glowing with genuine happiness. It was like watching a man praise the beauty of the knife being sharpened behind his back. My internal world was a silent war zone. Every time I saw them together, a cold dread coiled in my stomach. I saw the private jokes that excluded Marcus, the text messages that made Chloe's phone light up at all hours, which she would quickly hide if Marcus entered the room. I saw the way Caleb would look at the home they shared, the beautiful life Marcus had built, with a look of undisguised, covetous envy. Each observation was a scream I swallowed. I would rehearse the conversation in my head, the words I needed to say to Marcus. "She's not who you think she is. Caleb is betraying you." But the ghost of that 8-year-old boy at the top of the stairs would always stop me. The fear of that shattering sound was more powerful than the truth. So I remained the silent fixer, desperately, foolishly believing that if I ignored the fire, it might just burn itself out. The fire, of course, was building into an inferno. And the anniversary dinner was the explosion. My parents chose an old, elegant restaurant downtown, the kind with white tablecloths, heavy silverware, and waiters who moved with silent, ghostly efficiency. The private room was filled with soft light and a low murmur of happy conversation. It was my mother's fantasy brought to life. Her 3 sons, handsome and successful. Her future daughter-in-law, radiant and perfect. Her husband of 35 years, looking at her with pride. She was incandescent with the success of her production. Marcus stood to give a toast. He spoke beautifully, as he always did, his voice full of sincere emotion. He talked about our parents' example of lasting love, about family, and about how he hoped to build a future just as strong and enduring with Chloe. He raised his glass, his eyes shining with love for her. To Chloe, he finished, who is my entire world. We all clapped. Chloe smiled, a perfect, demure smile, and blew him a small kiss. Then, Caleb pushed his chair back and stood up. He was already drunk, his movements just a little too loose, his eyes holding a reckless gleam. "I'd like to make a toast, too," he announced, his voice just loud enough to command the room. A nervous quiet fell. He started conventionally enough, raising his glass to our parents. Then, he turned his attention to Marcus. "To my big brother, Marcus," he said, and the air immediately grew colder. "The man who has it all. The big, successful company. The respect of everyone in this town." And, of course, he paused, letting his eyes sweep deliberately over to Chloe, the perfect fiancée. "Caleb, sit down," my mother whispered, her voice tight with panic. He ignored her, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "But you can provide a woman with everything in the world. A big house, fancy vacations, a diamond ring. And it might not be enough. Some women don't just want a provider." He locked his gaze on Marcus, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, sneering tone. "They want a real man." The silence in the room was absolute, a crushing weight. It was so quiet I could hear the fizz of the champagne bubbles in my glass. Marcus stared at Caleb, his expression a mask of confusion, not yet understanding the poison being injected into his veins. And then Caleb delivered the killing blow. He looked from Marcus to Chloe, who had gone deathly pale, her eyes wide with terror. "She's been with me for months, brother," he said, the words slithering into the silence. "Sleeping in your bed, in your house. And I have to say, she's a hell of a lot more fun when you're not around." I will never forget the sound that followed. It wasn't a shout or a cry. It was the sharp, crystalline crack of Marcus's water glass slipping from his nerveless fingers and shattering on the floor. It was the exact sound I'd spent my entire life trying to prevent. The aftermath was a blur of fractured moments. Caleb and Chloe, a united front of defiance, leaving together into the night. My mother, her face a mask of horror, repeating, "We can fix this, we can fix this," like a mantra against the encroaching darkness. My father, his face like stone, his rage a silent, terrifying force directed entirely at Caleb. I drove Marcus home. We didn't speak. The silence in the car was heavier than any words could be. When we got to his house, the beautiful home he was so proud of, I saw it through his eye for the first time. A crime scene. Wedding magazines were fanned out on the coffee table, their glossy pages filled with smiling brides. A framed photo of him and Chloe, taken the day he proposed, sat on the mantelpiece, a monument to a lie. He walked through the rooms like a ghost, his soul seemingly hollowed out. He locked himself in his study. I stayed, sitting in the dark living room, listening to the silence, the sound of my brother's world breaking apart. My personal rock bottom came 2 days later. I went to my parents' house, expecting to strategize, to find support for Marcus. Instead, I found my mother in full damage control mode. "You need to talk to him, Leo," she said, her hands fluttering nervously. "You need to be the bigger person here. We have to forgive, for the sake of the family." Then came the confession that finally broke me. "I gave Caleb some money," she admitted, refusing to meet my eyes. "For a deposit on a new apartment. For him and Chloe. They need a fresh start." I stared at her, a cold, sickening realization washing over me. My silence, my role as the fixer, hadn't preserved the family. It had enabled its decay. It had taught my mother that any problem could be smoothed over, that any betrayal could be absorbed. I had created a system where there were no consequences. I left without a word. As I was driving, my phone rang. It was a number I hadn't seen in years. My Aunt Carol, my dad's estranged sister. She'd left town a decade ago, fed up with what she called my mother's tyranny of appearances. She was the family truth teller, and we hadn't been able to handle her truth. "I heard the news," she said, her voice raspy and devoid of sympathy. "Don't tell me you're all sitting around singing Kumbaya and pretending it didn't happen." "It's a mess, Carol," I said, my voice hollow. "Of course it's a mess," she snapped. "Your mother will always choose the illusion of peace over the truth. But you, Leo, you always knew where the bodies were buried. Are you going to let that little weasel get away with burning your brother's life down for sport?" Her words were a slap, hard and stinging. Then she asked the question that changed everything. "Remember how your grandparents set up that trust for the down payment on the house? The one specifically for Marcus's future? Did anyone ever formally dissolve that?" The world stopped. The trust. The legal document I had filed away myself years ago, thinking of it as a mere formality. My passivity, my fear, my lifetime of patching cracks, it all burned away in an instant. It was replaced by something new. Something cold, hard, and clear. It was the feeling of a strategist who has just seen the enemy's critical weakness. I wasn't a fixer anymore. I wasn't there to douse the fire. I was going to get the gasoline. For the next week, I barely slept. My apartment became a war room, the dining table buried under stacks of paper, my laptop glowing late into the night. The part of my brain that I used to run the firm, the meticulous, logical, detail-oriented part, kicked into overdrive. The grief and helplessness I'd been drowning in were channeled into a singular, focused mission. I was no longer Leo, the peacemaker. I was Leo, the forensic accountant of our family's lies. My first target was the house. I tore through boxes of old family files I stored in my basement, the air thick with the dust of forgotten history. And there it was, a thick, cream-colored folder tied with faded blue ribbon. Inside were the original trust documents from our grandparents and the deed to the house. My hands were steady as I read the legal jargon, but my heart was pounding. Aunt Carol was right. It was all there in black and white, an undeniable legal truth that our family had conveniently ignored for 2 decades. The sizable down payment for the family home had come directly from a trust established exclusively for Marcus, designated as an advance on his inheritance to secure his future. My parents were the trustees, but the beneficiary was, and had always been, Marcus. Legally, a significant percentage of the home that Caleb grew up in, the home my parents lorded over as their kingdom, belonged to the brother he had just destroyed. This discovery was the key, but I knew it wasn't enough. I needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal. I needed to prove intent. My mind went to an old family computer we had all shared in the late 2000s, a relic now, but one I had diligently backed up to a private cloud server years ago, a standard protocol I followed for all our digital assets. It was a long shot, but I had a hunch. Late one night, fueled by black coffee and a cold rage, I logged into the archive. I ran a search for emails between Caleb and Chloe, filtering for the year before she even got engaged to Marcus. My breath caught in my throat. Dozens of results popped up. Reading them was like watching a venomous snake slowly uncoil. This wasn't a whirlwind romance that had tragically hurt people. This was a premeditated conspiracy. They were filled with Caleb's poisonous envy and Chloe's cold, hard ambition. From Caleb, "He doesn't deserve you. He just bought you, like he buys everything. Stick with the plan. Once you have the ring, you have security. Then we can tell him." From Chloe, "It's harder than I thought, see, he's so nice. But I keep my eyes on the prize. Thinking about the house, the business, our future." The most damning email was from Caleb, sent just weeks before the proposal. "Just play along for a few more months. Once you're married, you're secure. Then we can tell him. He's weak, he'll roll over. We'll have the life he built. He's weak, he'll roll over." I printed every single email. The stack of paper felt heavy in my hands, a physical manifestation of their treachery. The next morning, I was in the office of a litigation lawyer Aunt Carol had recommended, a woman with a reputation for being a shark in a tailored suit. I laid out the trust documents and the emails on her polished mahogany desk. She read everything in silence, her expression unreadable. When she was done, she looked up at me over her glasses, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. "Mr. Evans," she said, "this isn't just a family drama. This is a gift." She confirmed it all. Marcus could force a sale of the house and claim his majority share. We had grounds for a civil suit for conspiracy and the recovery of all wedding-related expenses. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had been completely inverted. That evening, I went to Marcus's house. He was a shell of himself, sitting in the dark, the silence of the house a deafening roar. I didn't say anything at first. I just turned on a lamp and placed the two folders on the table in front of him, one with the trust documents, the other with the emails. He opened the emails first. I watched him read, saw the flicker of life return to his eyes, not of hope, but of pure, white-hot fury. The man who had been paralyzed by grief was now being reanimated by the sheer, calculated cruelty of the betrayal. The idea that he had been the victim of a tragic love affair was painful, but the realization that he had been the target of a long con, a mark in a scheme orchestrated by his own brother, was galvanizing. He finished the last page and looked up at me, his eyes clear for the first time in weeks. His jaw was tight. "Thank you, Leo," he said, his voice low and steady. He stood up and walked over to his desk, picking up the phone. "You found the ammunition. Now let me finish it." He was the one who called the lawyer. He was the one who gave the order to proceed. In that moment, the golden child wasn't a victim anymore. He was taking back control. The stage for the final act was set, ironically, by my mother. Oblivious to our actions, she called another family meeting. "It's time to heal," her text message read. "We need to talk this through and find forgiveness. Please, everyone, at the house. Sunday at 2 p.m. She invited Caleb and Chloe. It was perfect. They would walk into the lion's den, thinking it was a sanctuary. Sunday arrived. Marcus and I walked into the family home together. The air was thick with a tense, manufactured civility. My mother had baked cookies. Caleb and Chloe were already there, sitting on the sofa, a portrait of wronged, tragic lovers ready to graciously accept the family's apology. My mother started with a tearful plea for understanding and unity. Caleb looked smug. Chloe looked serene. When Mom finished, Marcus stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Before we talk about forgiveness," he said, his voice resonating with a cold, hard authority, "we need to talk about fraud." I placed two identical folders on a coffee table, one in front of Caleb and Chloe, one in front of my parents. "I suggest you read this," Marcus said. I watched their faces, my mother's confusion turning to disbelief as she read the trust documents. My father's face hardening, the color draining from it as he realized the depth of his naivety. I watched Chloe's serene mask crumble as she saw the printed emails, her hands starting to tremble. And I watched Caleb. I watched his smug expression melt into rage, then into panicked denial, and finally, as he stared at his own words, his own conspiracy laid bare, into pathetic cornered fear. He looked up, his eyes wild. He always had everything," he stammered, looking at Marcus. Then, in a moment of pure, pathetic honesty, the mask fell away completely. His voice cracked, becoming the whine of a petulant child. "I just wanted what he had," he whispered. "It was always so easy for him." Marcus looked down at him, not with pity, but with a chilling finality. "The house will be sold," he said, his voice like ice. "My lawyer will be in touch regarding the recovery of all wedding expenses, which, as your emails prove, were solicited under false pretenses. You have 30 days to vacate my property. Get out of my house." The explosion that followed was as ugly as I had always feared, but it was also strangely liberating. Caleb erupted, not with the confident rage of a wronged man, but with the frantic, sputtering fury of a trapped animal. He yelled, he accused, he tried to turn the tables on Marcus, on me, on our parents. But his words were empty, hollowed out by the irrefutable truth printed on the pages in front of him. Chloe, ever the pragmatist, was a statue of ice. Her mind, I could see, was not on the emotional carnage, but on a rapid, cold calculation of her losses. When Caleb's tirade dissolved into pathetic, pleading sobs, she stood up. She didn't look at him. She didn't look at any of us. She simply walked out the front door, her face a blank mask, leaving the wreckage of her co-conspirator and their great love story behind her. Their bond, it turned out, was only as strong as its potential for profit. The family didn't heal. It broke, but it broke open, and for the first time the light got in. The weeks that followed were a painful but necessary reconstruction. Caleb, stripped of his financial safety net and social standing, was forced to move into a grim, tiny apartment across town. His life of coasting on the family's success was over. The justice he faced wasn't a dramatic, cinematic karma. It was the slow, grinding, everyday reality of consequences. He sent me a string of hateful, rambling texts, which I read once and then blocked. His chapter was closed. My relationship with my parents entered a new, uncharted territory. My mother was devastated, not by the betrayal, but by the public demolition of her perfect family. She saw my actions, and Marcus's, as an act of destruction, not salvation. Our conversations became strained, filled with things unsaid. She might never forgive us for choosing the truth over her carefully constructed peace. My father, however, surprised me. A few weeks after the confrontation, he asked me and Marcus to meet him for breakfast. We sat in a quiet diner booth, the air thick with the awkwardness of three men who had never been good at talking. He looked older, wearier. "Your mother," he began, stirring his coffee, "she's so afraid of what people will think. Always has been. Ever since her own brother caused a scandal back in their hometown. She thinks if everything looks perfect on the outside, the cracks won't show." He finally looked up, meeting our eyes. His were filled with a shame that was profound. And I was a fool. I thought Caleb needed protecting. I saw a son who was struggling, and I didn't see the man he was becoming. I didn't realize I was feeding a monster. He cleared his throat. "I'm sorry," he said, the two words costing him more than 1,000 others. "To both of you, I am so sorry. It wasn't a fix. It wasn't an absolution, but it was a start." 6 months passed. A year. Life began to find its new rhythm. Marcus sold the family home. It was a strange, bittersweet day, watching another family's car pull into the driveway we had known our whole lives. He used to share the proceeds to buy a stunning, modern condo downtown, a place with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city skyline. It was all clean lines and open spaces, a home that looked forward, not back. He poured the rest of the money back into our firm. He started therapy. He started dating again, cautiously, but with a newfound wisdom in his eyes. He wasn't the same trusting, naive man. The world had broken him, but he had put himself back together, stronger in the broken places. And me? I was transformed. The quiet, conflict-avoidant fixer was gone. In his place was a man who understood that true peace isn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice. I learned to speak my mind, to set boundaries, to say no. My relationship with Marcus became a true partnership, forged in fire and rebuilt on a foundation of brutal honesty and unwavering loyalty. He was no longer just a golden child I propped up. He was my brother, my partner, my friend. A year after that fateful Sunday, I was at Marcus's condo. We were leaning over his large marble island, looking at the blueprints for our newest project, a nonprofit community art center. He was sketching an amendment to the atrium, a smile playing on his lips. It was a real smile, one that reached his eyes. The easy, unburdened smile of a man who had walked through hell and found his way out. I looked out the window at the sprawling city lights, each one a story, a life. Our family wasn't a perfect picture in a frame anymore. It was a messy, complicated, fractured thing, but it was real. I had learned that the most loving act you can perform for your family is sometimes to force them to face the truth, no matter how much it hurts. You can't fix a foundation that is fundamentally rotten. Sometimes you have to tear the whole damn thing down and build anew. They say blood is thicker than water, a bond that can't be broken. But they don't tell you what to do when that bond becomes a chain, dragging you down into the dark. They don't tell you what to do when the blood itself is poisoned. What would you be willing to burn down to save what truly matters?